For centuries, one building announced to sailors that knowledge, empire, and safe harbor could all rise from the same shore. It stood at the edge of Egypt, where the Mediterranean met the mouth of the Nile, a tower of white stone and flame that could be seen from perhaps 50 kilometers away across the open water. It was not merely a beacon, it was a declaration carved into the sky itself that human ingenuity could tame the darkness of the sea. Tonight, as you settle into your own safe harbor, let us travel back through the millennia to stand at the foot of that impossible tower and learn the story of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Welcome to Let's Learn While You Sleep. Tonight, we rest beneath ancient skies where the warm winds of North Africa carry the scent of salt and papyrus, and where one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world once lit the way home for countless mariners. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, known in Greek as the Pharos, stood on the small island of Pharos in the harbor of Alexandria, Egypt. It was constructed during the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, likely completed around 280 BCE, though its planning may have begun under his father, Ptolemy I Soter. Ancient sources describe it as one of the tallest structures in the world at that time, and modern estimates suggest it rose to a height of roughly 100 to 130 meters, depending on the source and the interpretation of ancient texts. For more than 1,000 years, this tower served as a working lighthouse, a monument to Hellenistic engineering and a symbol of the great city that Alexander the Great had founded. Let yourself breathe slowly now. Let the story unfold like the sea. To understand why the lighthouse was built, we must first understand the city it served. Alexandria was founded in 331 BCE by Alexander the Great, who chose the site along the western edge of the Nile Delta for its natural harbor and its position between the Mediterranean and the interior of Egypt. Alexander reportedly envisioned a city that would become a center of trade, learning, and Greek culture in the eastern Mediterranean. He did not live to see it flourish. He died in 323 BCE in Babylon at the age of 32, and his vast empire was divided among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, son of Lagos, who would become Ptolemy I Soter, the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Under Ptolemy and his successors, Alexandria grew rapidly into one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the ancient world. Its population may have reached several 100,000 within a few generations. The city was laid out on a grid plan, in the Hippodamian style favored by Greek urban planners, with broad avenues and monumental public buildings. The famous Library of Alexandria, which became one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in antiquity, was established during this period, along with the Mouseion, a research institution that attracted scholars, poets, and scientists from across the Greek-speaking world. And yet, for all its intellectual grandeur, Alexandria was first and foremost a port city. Its wealth depended on maritime trade, and its harbor was its lifeline. The approach to the harbor, however, was treacherous. The coastline was low and flat, offering few landmarks for navigating sailors, and the waters near the shore were scattered with reefs and shallow sandbars. Ships arriving from across the Mediterranean needed guidance, especially at night or during storms. The island of Pharos, which sat just off the coast and was connected to the mainland by a long causeway called the Heptastadion, roughly 7 stadia in length, or approximately 1.3 kilometers, offered the ideal location for a guiding light. And so the idea of the lighthouse was born, not from vanity, but from necessity. Construction of the lighthouse is traditionally attributed to the architect Sostratus of Cnidus. According to the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, writing in his Natural History in the 1st century CE, Sostratus was responsible for the design and may have dedicated the structure, though some scholars have debated whether he was the architect, the financial patron, or both. An often repeated story, recorded by the Greek writer Lucian of Samosata in the 2nd century CE, claims that Sostratus inscribed his own name on the stone of the lighthouse beneath a layer of plaster, upon which the name of the ruling king was written. Over time, the plaster eroded, revealing the architect's hidden dedication to the gods who protected sailors. Whether this tale is literally true remains uncertain, but it speaks to the pride that ancient builders felt in their monumental works. The construction likely began around 297 BCE under Ptolemy I Soter and was completed around 280 BCE under his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus. It was an enormous undertaking. Ancient accounts, though they vary in their details, consistently describe a structure of 3 distinct tiers. The lowest tier was square in its cross-section, massive and broad, providing a stable foundation. Above it rose an octagonal middle section, somewhat narrower, and atop that stood a cylindrical upper section, which housed the fire and the mechanism for projecting light. At the very summit, according to many ancient depictions, stood a large statue, most often identified as a representation of Zeus Soter, meaning Zeus the Savior, or possibly Poseidon, the god of the sea. The building materials are believed to have been primarily local limestone and granite, chosen for their durability against the corrosive salt air and the relentless Mediterranean winds. Some accounts mention that lead was used to seal the joints between the massive stone blocks, a technique known in other monumental constructions of the period. Consider how slowly such a tower must have risen. Block by block, year by year, carried upward by human hands and simple machines, until it stood taller than almost anything else in the known world. And now, let us consider the light itself, for that is what made this building more than mere architecture. At the summit of the cylindrical upper tier, a fire burned, fed by fuel that was carried up through the interior of the tower. The most commonly cited fuel is wood, though some later Arabic sources mention oil. The fire alone, however, would not have been sufficient to project a beam visible across the vast distances described by ancient writers. Several ancient and medieval accounts refer to a great mirror, sometimes described as being made of polished bronze, or, in some later retellings, of glass. The purpose of this mirror, according to these descriptions, was to gather and reflect the light of the fire outward across the sea, amplifying its intensity so that it could be seen at a distance that some ancient writers estimated at roughly 300 stadia, or approximately 55 kilometers, though modern scholars consider such figures to be exaggerations. The physics of light and curvature of the Earth suggest that even from a height of 130 meters, the geometric horizon would lie at roughly 40 kilometers, and atmospheric conditions would often reduce visibility well below that. Still, even a more conservative estimate of 30 to 40 kilometers of visibility would have made the Pharos an extraordinary navigational aid. The exact nature of the mirror remains one of the enduring mysteries of the lighthouse. Some researchers have proposed that it may have been a large concave reflector, similar in principle to a parabolic mirror, which would focus the divergent light of the fire into a more directed beam. If so, this would represent a remarkably sophisticated understanding of optics for the 3rd century BCE. Others have suggested that the accounts of the mirror may have been embellished over the centuries, growing more fantastical with each retelling. The Arab geographer al-Idrisi, writing in the 12th century CE, described the mirror in terms that border on the legendary, claiming it could be used to observe ships at impossible distances or even to set enemy vessels ablaze. These later accounts likely blend real observation with myth. What we can say with reasonable confidence is that the Pharos employed some form of reflective technology to enhance its flame, making it one of the earliest known examples of applied optics in architecture. Pharos did not exist in isolation. It was the crowning jewel of a harbor system that made Alexandria one of the most important ports in the ancient Mediterranean. The Heptastadion, the long causeway connecting Pharos Island to the mainland, divided the harbor into 2 distinct basins. To the east lay the Great Harbor, which served the royal quarter and the most important commercial docks. To the west lay the harbor known as Eunostos, meaning safe return, a name that speaks to the hopes of every sailor who ever set out across uncertain waters. The lighthouse stood at the eastern tip of Pharos Island, guarding the entrance to the Great Harbor, and its light would have been the first sign of civilization that a sailor approaching from the open sea would have seen. Imagine for a moment what that must have felt like. You have been at sea for days, perhaps weeks, navigating by the stars and the wind, with nothing but the horizon in every direction. The water is dark, the sky is vast, and the world feels as though it might go on forever without a single sign of human presence. And then, slowly, faintly, a glow appears on the edge of the world. It is not a star, for it does not move with the heavens. It is steady, warm, and low on the horizon, growing brighter with every passing hour. It is the Pharos, calling you home. The emotional power of that experience should not be underestimated. For ancient mariners, the sea was a place of genuine peril. Storms could arise without warning, navigation was imprecise, and shipwrecks were common. The lighthouse was not just a practical tool, it was a promise. It told the sailor that the darkness had a boundary, that beyond the waves there was solid ground, warm food, and the company of other human beings. In this way, the Pharos served a psychological function as much as a navigational one. It was a symbol of order imposed upon chaos, of light carved into the indifferent night, and of a civilization confident enough to announce its presence across the open sea. Let that thought rest with you now, gently, as we continue. As centuries passed, the lighthouse endured, though the world around it changed profoundly. Egypt passed from the Ptolemaic dynasty to Roman rule after the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BCE, and Alexandria became the capital of the Roman province of Aegyptus. The Pharos continued to function throughout this transition. Roman writers, including Strabo, who visited Alexandria around 24 BCE, described the lighthouse in some detail, confirming its continued operation and its importance to the harbor. Strabo noted its white stone construction and its prominent position at the tip of Pharos Island, visible from a great distance. The Roman period brought both prosperity and change to Alexandria. The city remained one of the largest in the empire, second perhaps only to Rome itself, and its harbour continued to serve as a vital nexus for the grain trade that fed the imperial capital. Ships laden with Egyptian wheat departed regularly for Rome, and the lighthouse guided them safely out of the harbour just as it welcomed them back. During the Roman centuries, the lighthouse may have undergone repairs and modifications, though specific records of Roman-era restorations are scarce. We know that Roman engineers were skilled in maintaining and improving existing infrastructure, and it would be surprising if a structure of such strategic importance were left entirely unattended. Some scholars believe that the Romans may have upgraded the fuel source or the reflective apparatus, though this remains speculative. What we do know is that the lighthouse stood firm through the Roman Republic's transformation into the Roman Empire, through the rise of Christianity and through the gradual decline of Roman central authority in the western provinces. By the time the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, the pharaohs had already been burning for more than 700 years. It had outlasted dynasties, religions, and forms of government. It had watched empires rise and crumble while it continued its simple, essential task, casting light across the water night after night, century after century. A quiet monument to the idea that some things endure because they serve a purpose deeper than politics or power. Lighthouse survived into the Islamic period as well. After the Arab conquest of Egypt in 641 CE, Alexandria remained an important city, though it gradually ceded its primacy to the new capital of Fustat and later Cairo. Arab writers and geographers who visited or described Alexandria in the centuries that followed left valuable accounts of the Pharos, some of the most detailed descriptions we possess. The Andalusian traveller Ibn Jubayr visited Alexandria in 1183 CE and described the lighthouse as still standing, though he noted signs of deterioration. He recorded its immense size and the impression it made upon travellers approaching from the sea. The geographer Al-Idrisi, writing for the Norman king Roger II of Sicily around 1154 CE, also described the lighthouse, though some of his claims are thought to be exaggerated or drawn from earlier sources rather than personal observation. Perhaps the most significant accounts come from the Moroccan traveller Ibn Battuta, one of the great explorers of the medieval world, who visited Alexandria twice. During his first visit in 1326 CE, he described the lighthouse as partially ruined, but still recognizable. When he returned in 1349 CE, he recorded that the structure had deteriorated to the point where it was no longer possible to enter it or climb to its doorway. Between those two visits, a series of earthquakes had taken a devastating toll. The region around Alexandria is seismically active, and historical records document significant earthquakes in 956 CE, 1303 CE, and 1323 CE. The earthquake of 1303 in particular is believed to have caused catastrophic damage to the already weakened structure. By the time Ibn Battuta made his second visit, the lighthouse that had guided sailors for more than 1,500 years was little more than a ruin. The slow collapse of the Pharos was not a single dramatic event. It was a gradual surrender to the forces of nature, to the shaking of the earth and the erosion of wind and salt spray, a process that unfolded across centuries, almost too slowly to be perceived in any single human lifetime. In 1480 CE, the Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay ordered the construction of a fortress on the site where the lighthouse had stood, using some of the fallen stones from the Pharos itself as building material. The citadel of Kite Bay still stands today on the eastern tip of Pharos Island, now a peninsula since the ancient heptastadion silted up over the centuries and merged the island permanently with the mainland. If you were to visit modern Alexandria and walk to the citadel, you would be standing on the very ground where the lighthouse once rose. Some of the massive granite blocks visible in the fortress walls are believed to have been recycled from the original structure, a quiet echo of the ancient wonder embedded in the medieval stone. But the story of the Pharos did not end with its physical collapse. In 1994, a team of underwater archaeologists led by the French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur began a systematic survey of the waters around the citadel of Kite Bay. What they discovered on the harbour floor was remarkable. Scattered across the seabed lay hundreds of massive architectural fragments, including enormous stone blocks, columns, sphinxes, and statues, some dating to the Pharaonic period and others to the Ptolemaic era. Among these submerged ruins, researchers identified what they believed to be fragments of the lighthouse itself, including several colossal statues that may have stood near or upon the structure. Satellite imagery and sonar mapping have since been used to create detailed maps of the underwater site, revealing a debris field that speaks to the immense scale of what once stood above the waterline. These discoveries confirmed what historians had long suspected, that the remains of the lighthouse were not entirely lost, but rather lay beneath the waves, just meters from the modern shore. The sea that the pharaohs had watched over for so many centuries had in the end reclaimed it. There is a quiet poetry in that. The tower that guided sailors through the water now rests within the water itself, its stones draped in algae and sea life, slowly becoming part of the very element it once conquered with light. Let us pause now and consider the engineering that made the Pharos possible, for it represents one of the most ambitious structural achievements of the ancient world. Building a tower of roughly 100 to 130 meters in an era without steel, without concrete, as the Romans would later develop it, and without powered machinery, required an extraordinary understanding of materials, forces, and construction techniques. The three-tiered design of the lighthouse was not merely aesthetic, it was structurally logical. The broad square base, which ancient sources suggest may have measured roughly 30 meters on each side, provided a wide foundation that distributed the immense weight of the structure across a large area, reducing the pressure on the underlying soil and bedrock. This is the same principle that engineers still use today when designing foundations for tall buildings. The transition from a square base to an octagonal middle section, and then to a cylindrical top, gradually reduced the cross-sectional area of the tower as it rose, lowering its center of gravity and reducing the wind load on the upper portions. Wind resistance is a critical concern for tall, slender structures, and the ancient architects appear to have understood this intuitively, even if they lacked the formal mathematical tools of modern structural engineering. Some reconstructions suggest that the interior of the tower contained a ramp or a spiral staircase wide enough to allow pack animals to carry fuel to the upper levels. If this is accurate, it would mean that the internal structure had to bear not only its own weight and the weight of the external walls, but also the live load of animals and heavy fuel being transported upward. The logistics of keeping the fire burning continuously would have been considerable, requiring a steady supply of wood or oil. a rotation of keepers, and constant maintenance of the reflective apparatus. Some modern engineers have estimated that maintaining a fire bright enough to be visible at such distances would have consumed substantial quantities of fuel each night, though exact figures remain speculative. What is not speculative is the result. For over a millennium, the fire burned and the light reached across the sea. The influence of the Lighthouse of Alexandria extended far beyond the harbor it served. It became the archetype for lighthouses throughout the ancient and medieval world, and its very name became the word for lighthouse in several languages. In French, the word for lighthouse is phare. In Italian, it is faro. In Spanish, likewise, faro. In Portuguese, farol. All of these derive directly from Pharos, the name of the island on which the lighthouse stood. This is one of those rare instances in which a single structure was so iconic, so thoroughly associated with its function, that it gave its name to an entire category of buildings across multiple languages and centuries. The Romans built lighthouses of their own, inspired in part by the Pharos model. One of the most notable was the Tower of Hercules, constructed in the late 1st or early 2nd century CE at what is now A Coruña in northwestern Spain. Remarkably, the Tower of Hercules still stands today and still functions as a lighthouse, making it the oldest known working Roman lighthouse in the world, and one of the oldest lighthouses of any kind still in operation. Its design, while more modest than the Pharos, reflects the same essential principle. A tall stone tower with a fire at its summit, built to guide ships along a dangerous coast. The concept of the Pharos also influenced lighthouse construction in the Islamic world. Arab engineers and architects who maintained and eventually inherited the lighthouse tradition built their own navigational beacons along the coasts of North Africa, the Red Sea, and the Persian Gulf. The idea that a coastal city should announce its presence with a permanent light source became a standard practice across the medieval Mediterranean, a legacy that traces directly back to the tower on Pharos Island. Even today, the fundamental principle of every modern lighthouse in the world, a tall structure with a powerful light placed at a strategic point along the coast, echoes the innovation that Sostratus and the Ptolemies set in stone more than 2,300 years ago. The Pharos did not merely light the way for ships, it lit the way for an entire tradition of maritime safety that persists to this day. There is another dimension to the story of the Pharos that deserves our attention as we rest here together in the quiet of the night. The lighthouse was not merely a feat of engineering, it was an expression of the broader intellectual culture of Ptolemaic Alexandria, a city where the boundaries between science, art, and governance were remarkably fluid. The same dynasty that built the lighthouse also founded the Library of Alexandria and the Mouseion, institutions that attracted some of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Euclid, the father of geometry, is believed to have worked in Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy I. Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who served as the chief librarian, famously calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy around 240 BCE, using nothing more than the angle of shadows at two different locations and the known distance between them. His estimate, roughly 40,000 kilometers, is astonishingly close to the modern accepted value of approximately 40,075 kilometers at the equator. Archimedes, though primarily associated with Syracuse, had strong intellectual connections to Alexandria. Ctesibius of Alexandria, active in the 3rd century BCE, invented some of the earliest known mechanical devices, including a water clock of unprecedented accuracy and an early form of the pipe organ. Herophilus and Erasistratus, working in Alexandria during the same period, performed some of the first systematic dissections of the human body, advancing the understanding of anatomy far beyond anything previously known. This was the intellectual ecosystem in which the lighthouse was conceived and built. It was not an isolated monument erected by brute labor alone. It was the product of a culture that valued observation, measurement, and the practical application of knowledge. The same curiosity that drove Eratosthenes to measure the earth drove the architects of the Pharos to calculate wind loads, to engineer a reflective system for amplifying firelight, and to build a structure that would stand for more than 1,000 years. The lighthouse and the library were expressions of the same impulse, the belief that understanding the world is both possible and worth the effort. Let us drift now to the question of how we know what the lighthouse looked like, for no complete ancient drawing or blueprint of the structure has survived. Our understanding of its appearance is pieced together from a mosaic of sources, each contributing a fragment to the larger picture. Ancient coins minted in Alexandria during the Roman period depict the lighthouse in profile, showing its three-tiered structure with a flame or a statue at the summit. These coins, while small and stylized, provide some of the most direct visual evidence we have. Mosaics from the ancient world, including a well-known example from the Libyan city of Qasr, Libya, dating to the 6th century CE, also depict structures that appear to represent the pharaohs. Written descriptions from ancient and medieval authors, including Strabo, Pliny the Elder, the anonymous author of the Caesar text known as the Bellum Alexandrinum from the 1st century BCE, and later Arab geographers, provide verbal accounts that complement the visual evidence. Modern reconstructions created by archaeologists and architectural historians attempt to synthesize all of these sources into coherent models. The German archaeologist Hermann Tiersch published one of the most influential reconstructions in 1909, proposing a detailed three-tiered design that has shaped popular imagination ever since. More recent studies, incorporating the underwater archaeological findings of the 1990s and advances in computer modeling, have refined these reconstructions, but significant uncertainties remain. We do not know the exact proportions of each tier, the precise arrangement of windows and internal passages, or the specific configuration of the fire and mirror apparatus. What we have is a convergence of evidence pointing toward a structure of remarkable height, elegant proportions, and functional brilliance. But the fine details remain shrouded in the same mist that the lighthouse once cut through with its beam. There is something fitting in this incompleteness. The lighthouse exists in our collective imagination as something partially seen, partially remembered, like a light on the horizon that you can perceive but never quite reach. It is a monument that lives now in the space between history and legend, between the documented and the dreamed. The legacy of the pharaohs also touches upon a deeper human need, one that extends far beyond navigation. Throughout history, tall structures have served as symbols of the civilizations that built them. The pyramids at Giza, constructed more than 2,000 years before the pharaohs, announced the power and permanence of the pharaohs. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia reached upward as bridges between earth and the divine. The Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, with their soaring spires and vast stained glass windows, expressed a longing for transcendence. The Pharos belongs to this tradition, but with a crucial difference. It was not primarily a tomb, a temple, or a church. It was a tool. Its primary purpose was practical, to save lives by guiding ships to safety. And yet, in fulfilling that practical purpose, it achieved something transcendent. It became a symbol of Alexandria itself, an emblem of the city's identity, its ambition, and its place in the world. When ancient writers listed the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a tradition that began to take shape in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was consistently included alongside the Great Pyramid, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and the Colossus of Rhodes. Of those 7, only the Great Pyramid still stands in recognizable form today. The rest have succumbed to earthquakes, fire, neglect, or deliberate destruction. The Pharos lasted longer than most of its fellow wonders, burning through the centuries while the Colossus lay toppled and the Temple of Artemis was reduced to a single column in a swamp. There is a lesson in this persistence. The structures that endure longest are often those that serve a genuine need, those that earn their place in the landscape not through grandeur alone, but through usefulness. The Pharos was grand, yes, but it was also necessary. And that necessity gave it a resilience that pure monuments rarely possess. Let that thought settle into you now, like a stone coming to rest on the seabed. In more recent times, the Pharos has continued to inspire both scholarship and imagination. In the early 2000s, the Egyptian government considered proposals to build a modern glass lighthouse or monument near the site of the original, as part of broader efforts to preserve and celebrate Alexandria's ancient heritage. The nearby Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a stunning modern library inaugurated in 2002 near the site believed to be close to the ancient library, reflects this same impulse to honor the city's intellectual past. Underwater archaeologists continue to study the submerged ruins in the harbor, using increasingly sophisticated technology, including 3-dimensional photogrammetry, remotely operated vehicles, and advanced sonar systems. In 2015, Egyptian authorities announced plans to create an underwater museum at the site, which would allow visitors to view the submerged ruins of the lighthouse and other ancient artifacts without disturbing them. Whether that ambitious project will come to fruition remains to be seen, but the intention itself speaks to the enduring fascination that the Pharos exerts on the modern imagination. Artists, architects, and writers continue to reimagine the lighthouse in paintings, digital reconstructions, novels, and films. Its 3-tiered form has become one of the most recognizable silhouettes in architectural history, even though no one alive has ever seen the original. There is something remarkable about that. A building that fell into the sea more than 500 years ago remains vivid in the collective human memory, not because of any surviving physical evidence visible above ground, but because the idea of the building is so powerful. A tower of light, a guide through darkness, a beacon that says, "Come this way, you are almost home." These are concepts that resonate at a level deeper than architecture. They speak to something fundamental in the human experience, the longing for safety, for direction, for the assurance that even in the darkest night, there is a light that knows you are coming and waits for you. And so, as we near the end of our journey tonight, let us hold one final thought about the Lighthouse of Alexandria. It was built by human hands, from stone quarried from the earth, using knowledge passed from teacher to student across generations. It was maintained by keepers who climbed its interior night after night, carrying fuel to the summit, tending the fire, polishing the mirror, performing the quiet, unglamorous work that kept the light alive. These keepers are nameless to history. We do not know who they were, what they thought about as they climbed those long stairs in the dark, or what they saw when they looked out from the summit across the moonlit sea. But we know that they were there because the light burned. For over 1,500 years, someone climbed those stairs, someone fed that flame, someone made sure the mirror caught the light and sent it streaming out across the water. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Pharos. Not its height, not its engineering, not its place among the seven wonders, but the simple human dedication of the people who kept it burning. Night after night, storm after storm, dynasty after dynasty, someone walked up those stairs and did their job. The lighthouse worked because people showed up. They carried the wood, they trimmed the flame, they wiped the mirror clean. And because of that quiet, persistent, unnamed labor, ships found their way home, cargoes arrived safely, and lives were saved. This is the deepest lesson of the Pharos, and it is a lesson you can carry with you into sleep. The most enduring light is not the most dramatic. It is the most consistent. It is the light that someone tends, patiently, faithfully, even when no one is watching, even when the world has forgotten their name. The light burns because someone cares enough to keep it burning, and that perhaps is the most human thing of all. Let us return one last time to the harbor itself and try to imagine what it must have felt like to see the Pharos for the first time. You are a merchant sailor, perhaps, arriving from the coast of Sicily or the shores of the Black Sea, and you have been at open water for days, maybe weeks. The horizon has been nothing but a thin, unwavering line between two shades of blue, and the stars at night have been your only companions, your only guides. The provisions are running low, the wood of the hull creaks with every swell, and the Mediterranean, for all its beauty, has shown you its indifference more than once. And then, on a morning when the haze sits low upon the water and the wind carries the faintest scent of land, something appears at the edge of the world. It is not a mountain, not a headland, not the dark silhouette of a cliff. It is a single vertical stroke of pale stone, impossibly tall, catching the first light of the sun and holding it there like a lantern raised by a giant hand. As the hours pass and the ship draws closer, the tower grows, and you begin to see its three distinct stages rising one upon the other, the broad square base, the elegant octagonal midsection, and the slender cylinder crowned with fire or polished bronze. The harbor widens around you, and other vessels appear, their sails catching the same breeze that fills your own, all of them converging upon this single point of brightness. The relief you feel is not merely practical, though the practical relief is immense. It is something older, something that lives in the chest rather than the mind. It is the feeling of being seen, of being expected, of arriving at a place that was built, in part, for you. The Pharos did not simply mark a location on a chart. It announced a covenant between the city and the sea, a promise that Alexandria would welcome whoever the tides delivered to its door. that light would always stand where darkness might otherwise have claimed the unwary and the lost. Consider for a moment how profoundly the idea of the lighthouse has shaped our language and our metaphors. We speak of someone being a beacon of hope, a guiding light, a shining example. We describe moments of understanding as illumination, and we call ignorance a kind of darkness. These are not accidental phrases. They are echoes of a very old relationship between human beings and fire, between consciousness and the visible world, and the Pharos of Alexandria sits near the headwaters of that tradition. Before the Pharos, there were signal fires and hilltop braziers, certainly, but no civilization had ever invested so much labor and ingenuity into a single permanent structure whose sole purpose was to project light across a vast distance. The tower transformed a temporary gesture, the raising of a flame, into something monumental and enduring. It said that light was not merely useful, but worthy of architecture, worthy of art, worthy of being placed among the wonders of the world. And so the Pharos became a kind of archetype, a shape that recurs across centuries and cultures whenever human beings wish to express the idea of guidance, of vigilance, of safe passage through uncertain waters. The very word for lighthouse in French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and several other Romance languages derives from the name Pharos itself. In French, it is fair. In Italian and Spanish, it is faro. In Portuguese, farol. These words have persisted for more than 2,000 years, long outliving the tower that gave them birth. They remind us that language, like architecture, is a kind of monument, a structure built from sound and meaning rather than stone and mortar. Every time someone in Lisbon or Naples or Marseille speaks of a lighthouse, they are, without knowing it, invoking a tower that stood on a small island off the coast of Egypt, in an age when the Library of Alexandria still held its scrolls and the ancient world still believed that knowledge and light were one and the same beautiful thing. The Pharos endures not in its stones, which the sea has taken, but in the very syllables we use to name what it once was. There is one more thing worth knowing about the Pharos, and it concerns what lies beneath the waves today. Beginning in the 1990s, a team of underwater archaeologists, led by the French researcher Jean-Yves Empereur, conducted a series of remarkable dives in the waters surrounding the fortress of Kite Bay, which was built in the late 15th century on or near the site where the lighthouse once stood. What they found on the seabed was extraordinary. Hundreds of massive stone blocks, some weighing as much as 70 tons, lay scattered across the harbour floor, along with granite columns, statues of pharaohs and sphinxes, and fragments of what appeared to be architectural elements from both the Ptolemaic and earlier Egyptian periods. The blocks were enormous, far larger than anything the medieval fortress would have required, and their arrangement on the seabed suggested that they had fallen from a great height, tumbling into the water as earthquakes gradually dismantled the tower over the centuries. Among the most striking discoveries were several colossal statues believed to represent Ptolemy II and his queen Arsinoe II, the very rulers who oversaw the completion of the Pharos. These figures had once stood near the base or entrance of the lighthouse, greeting arriving sailors with the carved faces of the dynasty that had ordered the tower's construction. Now they rest in the silt and sand of the Mediterranean, worn smooth by salt and time, their features softened but not erased. The Egyptian government and various international organizations have discussed the possibility of creating an underwater museum at the site, a place where divers and visitors could see these remnants in the very waters where they fell. Such a museum would be unlike any other in the world, a gallery without walls lit by filtered sunlight, where the exhibits are the bones of one of humanity's greatest achievements. Whether or not this vision comes to pass, the stones themselves remain, resting quietly on the harbour floor, holding the memory of a tower that once touched the sky, and now, gently and with great patience, gives its secrets back to the sea. And perhaps that is the truest lesson the Pharos of Alexandria has to offer, not a lesson about engineering or optics or the ambitions of kings, but something quieter, something that settles over you like a blanket drawn up against the evening air. It is the lesson that the things we build with care and purpose can outlast the materials from which they are made. The stone may crumble, the bronze may corrode, the fire may go out, and still the idea endures, still the light persists, in some form that is beyond the reach of earthquakes and tides. Every lighthouse that stands on every coast in every country in the world carries within it a trace of the Pharos. Every harbour light that blinks on at dusk, every channel marker that guides a vessel through a narrow strait, every lamp left burning in a window to welcome someone home, all of these are descendants, however distant, of that first great tower on the island of Pharos, where Sostratus of Cnidus, or whoever the true architect may have been, dared to imagine that a building could do what the stars do, that human craft could join the ancient conversation between light and darkness and hold its own. Tonight, as your breathing slows and the weight of the day lifts from your shoulders, you might picture it one more time. That pale tower standing at the edge of the ancient world, its fire reflected in water that is impossibly calm, its light reaching out across the harbour toward the open sea. It does not demand anything of you. It does not ask that you remember every detail or every date. It only asks that you rest in the knowledge that somewhere, once, a civilization built something extraordinary, something that said to every sailor and every traveler, "You are not alone. The light is here, the shore is near, and you may lay your worries down." Let that thought carry you now, gently, as the lighthouse carried so many safely home, into the deep and dreamless waters of sleep. Let us return one last time to the harbour of Alexandria, not as it was in its glory, but as it was in the years of slow diminishment, when the tower still stood, but the empire that built it had faded into memory. By the 7th century of the Common Era, the great library was gone. The Ptolemaic dynasty was dust, and Roman authority had long since given way to Byzantine rule and then to the rise of the Islamic caliphates. And yet, the lighthouse endured. Arab travelers who visited Alexandria in those centuries left behind written accounts that confirm the tower was still functioning, still guiding ships, still burning its fire against the Mediterranean night. The geographer Al-Idrisi, writing in the 12th century, described a structure that remained impressive even in its diminished state, though by then it had already suffered damage from earthquakes. It is a remarkable thing, when you think about it, that a building constructed around 280 BCE was still standing, still recognizable, still serving its original purpose nearly 1,500 years later. Consider the patience of that stone, the quiet resilience of those carefully fitted blocks of limestone and granite, holding their shape against the salt wind and the trembling earth century after century. But the earthquakes would not relent. A series of seismic events struck the region, most notably in the years 956, 1303, and 1323 of the Common Era, and each one took something from the Pharos that could not be restored. The damage was cumulative, the kind of slow ruin that does not announce itself with a single catastrophic collapse, but rather with the gradual loss of cornices, the cracking of load-bearing walls, the tilting of what was once perfectly vertical. By the time the Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay arrived in the late 15th century, what remained of the Pharos was little more than a ruin, a skeleton of its former self. And so, in approximately 1480, Qaitbay ordered the construction of a fortress on the very site where the lighthouse had stood, incorporating some of its fallen stones into the new walls. That fortress, the citadel of Qaitbay, still stands today on the tip of the Pharos Peninsula, a quiet monument built upon the bones of a wonder. Centuries after the Pharos vanished from the skyline, it lived on in a different way, not as stone and fire, but as an idea, a shape that echoed through the architecture of the world. The Romans, who had long admired the lighthouse, had already begun building their own versions during the height of their empire. The Tower of Hercules, constructed in what is now the city of A Coruña in northwestern Spain, was built during the reign of the Emperor Trajan in the late 1st or early 2nd century, and it still stands today, the oldest functioning Roman lighthouse in the world. Its form, a tall square base tapering upward, recalls the Pharos in spirit, if not in scale, and it has been guiding ships along the Atlantic coast for nearly 2,000 years. Across the Mediterranean, in the port cities of Ostia and Leptis Magna, the Romans erected smaller towers that served the same essential purpose, each one a descendant of the original idea that light, elevated and steady, could speak to ships across the darkness. And the influence traveled further still. When the great mosques of the early Islamic world were designed, some scholars have noted a resemblance between the form of the minaret, with its stacked geometric tiers narrowing toward the sky, and the three-tiered structure of the Pharos itself. The Arabic word for lighthouse, manara, shares its root with the word minaret. And though the connection between the two forms is debated among historians, the linguistic echo is striking and perhaps not coincidental. In the centuries that followed, as European powers built lighthouses along their own coasts, the fundamental design philosophy remained unchanged from what the Ptolemaic engineers had understood so long ago. You need a strong foundation, a tall and stable tower, and a light that can be seen from a great distance. The technology of the light itself evolved, from open flame to oil lantern to Fresnel lens to electric bulb. But the idea, the ancient, generous idea that a civilization should mark its dangerous shores so that strangers might pass safely, that idea has never changed. It was born in Alexandria, and it has been shining ever since. In 1994, a team of underwater archaeologists led by the French researcher Jean-Yves Empereur made a discovery that brought the Pharos closer to us than it had been in centuries. Working in the waters of the eastern harbour of Alexandria, near the site of the citadel of Qaitbay, they found scattered across the seabed a vast collection of massive stone blocks, granite columns, and fragments of colossal statues, many of them believed to be remnants of the lighthouse or of the structures that once surrounded it on the royal island of Pharos. Some of the blocks were enormous, weighing as much as 75 tons, the kind of stones that could only have come from a monumental structure. Among the objects recovered were fragments of sphinxes, obelisks, and statuary that dated back to the Ptolemaic period and even earlier to the age of the pharaohs, suggesting that the pharaohs' complex may have incorporated ancient Egyptian elements brought from other sites to dignify this new wonder of the Hellenistic world. The discovery was both thrilling and sobering, for these stones had lain beneath the waves for centuries, tumbled there by the very earthquakes that had destroyed the lighthouse, resting in the silt and the salt darkness like fragments of a shattered dream. Mapping the underwater site revealed that hundreds of architectural pieces were spread across the harbor floor, a silent archive of a building that had once commanded the sky. And yet, as with so many things in Alexandria, the site also raised more questions than it answered. Not all of the stone could be definitively attributed to the Pharos itself, and the centuries of harbor activity, shipwrecks, and coastal construction had mixed the evidence in complicated ways. What the divers saw through the blue-green haze of Mediterranean water was not a single building laid out neatly on the seabed, but rather a vast debris field, a puzzle whose pieces had been scattered by time, by tides, by the slow and patient work of the sea. And still, those stones were real. They could be touched, measured, photographed. For the first time in modern history, the Pharaohs was no longer merely a legend. It was something you could hold in your hands. And so tonight, as you lie here and your breathing grows slower and the edges of the waking world begin to soften, let the image of that ancient light settle gently behind your eyes. Imagine the fire at the top of the Pharaohs, not as something fierce or urgent, but as something patient, a warmth that has been burning in one form or another for over 2,000 years. It burned for the Ptolemaic sailors who crossed from Cyprus and Crete. It burned for the Roman grain ships heavy with Egyptian wheat, making their way toward Ostia and the hungry capital beyond. It burned for the Arab scholars who came to Alexandria seeking knowledge, who translated Greek manuscripts and carried the light of learning eastward. And in some quiet, enduring way, it burns still, not in flame or glass or electricity, but in the very concept that a civilization can choose to illuminate the darkness for those it will never meet. There is something deeply restful in that thought, something that asks nothing of you except to receive it. You do not need to build anything tonight. You do not need to solve or strive or measure. You only need to drift the way a ship drifts when the wind has calmed and the harbor is near and the light on the shore says gently, "You are close now. You are almost home." The Pharos of Alexandria was many things in its long life. It was an engineering marvel, a political statement, a navigational tool, a symbol of a young city's ambition. But at its heart, at the very center of what it was simply this: a kindness made visible. A fire kept burning through the night so that strangers might find their way. And that is perhaps the oldest and most human of all technologies, not the lens or the mirror or the carefully quarried stone, but the impulse to stand at the edge of the darkness and hold up a light for someone else. Let that thought carry you now, gently, like a current, into the deep and restful waters of sleep. Consider for a moment the flame itself, the heart of everything the Pharos was built to do. Ancient sources tell us that the light atop the tower was produced by a large open fire fed continuously through the night by workers who carried fuel up the interior ramp, a spiraling passage wide enough, according to some accounts, for a cart drawn by a donkey. The fuel was almost certainly wood, though some historians suggest that dried animal dung or even naphtha, a naturally occurring petroleum product known in the ancient world, may have supplemented it during certain periods. But fire alone, no matter how large, would not have been visible at the distances ancient writers claimed, distances of perhaps 30 miles or more across open water. And so there must have been something else, something that gathered that raw, flickering glow and focused it outward across the dark Mediterranean. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century of the Common Era, mentioned a great mirror at the summit of the Pharos, and later Arab chroniclers described a reflective surface of polished metal, possibly bronze, shaped to cast the firelight in a directed beam. Whether this reflector was flat, concave, or some combination of angled plates remains uncertain. Some modern engineers have proposed that a single large parabolic mirror of polished bronze could indeed have projected visible firelight to a range consistent with the ancient claims, though no archaeological fragment of such a mirror has ever been recovered from the harbour floor. It is also possible that multiple smaller reflectors were arranged together, each one catching a portion of the flame and redirecting it seaward. We simply do not know the precise design. What we do know is that the principle at work, the focusing of light through reflective geometry, would not be formally described in optics for many centuries. And yet the engineers of Ptolemaic Alexandria appear to have understood it intuitively, shaping metal to bend fire into something that could reach across the horizon. The flame rose, the mirror caught it, and the darkness over the sea was, for a little while, made navigable and kind. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Lighthouse of Alexandria is not how it fell, but how slowly it fell, how stubbornly it clung to the edge of the harbour across the centuries, diminished and cracked and still standing. The great earthquake of 956 CE damaged the upper tier severely, collapsing a significant portion of the octagonal section. Another earthquake in 1303 and yet another in 1323, both associated with the seismic activity of the Eastern Mediterranean's restless tectonic boundaries, brought down still more of the structure. By the time the Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay ordered the construction of a fortress on the site in 1480, only the massive lowest tier of the Pharos remained, its pale limestone blocks still rooted to the island of Pharos like the stump of an ancient tree. Qaitbay's builders incorporated those surviving stones directly into the new citadel's foundation, so that when you visit the fort today, which still stands at the tip of the eastern harbour, you are walking upon the bones of the lighthouse itself. Somewhere beneath your feet, cut blocks that were placed by Ptolemaic masons more than 2,000 years ago continue to bear weight, continue to hold. There is a quietness to that kind of endurance, a patience that outlasts not only storms and earthquakes, but entire civilizations. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Rome rose and fell. The Byzantines governed and departed. The Arab conquest brought a new language, a new faith, a new way of seeing the harbour. The Crusaders came and went. The Mamluks built their fortress. The Ottomans arrived. And through all of it, those lowest stones remained, doing what stones do best, which is simply to persist. They do not remember the fire that once burned above them, or the mirror that turned that fire into a sweeping arm of light. They do not remember the sailors who wept with relief at the sight of the tower after weeks at sea. They only hold their place quietly in the dark at the edge of the water while the centuries wash over them like tides. And now the flame grows soft, the mirror dims, the great tower dissolves into the warm darkness behind your eyelids, and the ancient sea settles into stillness. You do not need to hold any of these facts in your mind. They will be there when you wake, resting quietly in your memory like stones on the seafloor. For now, there is only this moment, the warmth of your bed, the slow rhythm of your breathing, the gentle knowledge that somewhere in the long sweep of human history, a light burned for you. It burned for every traveler, every seeker, every soul moving through the darkness toward home. Let the waves carry you now. Let the light fade gently to a warm glow on the edge of your awareness. The harbor is calm, the night is kind, and you are safe. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. If this journey brought you a little peace tonight, consider subscribing so we can travel together again. There are so many quiet wonders still waiting for us in the dark. Thank you for spending your night with Let's Learn While You Sleep. Subscribe and come back tomorrow night. We'll be here. Sleep well.